Dad didn't lower his voice when he said it. He pushed the envelope across the table like a trophy and told me, "We gave your wedding fund to your sister. She deserves a real wedding." The room froze. My mother nodded. My sister smiled. I didn't cry, I just looked at my fiancé. And when he rose from his chair, pulled out his phone, and said, "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" That smile disappeared so fast it felt like someone cut the power. But the truth didn't begin at that table. I grew up in a house where love always had a spotlight, and somehow it never landed on me for long. My parents believed in achievement the way some families believe in religion: measured, displayed, worshipped. The dining room walls were proof. Every frame held a milestone from my sister's life: her debate, trophies, her college acceptance, her first promotion. My memories lived in the shadows between those frames, quiet and uncelebrated. I learned early how to move through that house without expecting much. I kept my head down, built a small career of my own as a freelance designer, and pretended I didn't notice how often conversations drifted back to the daughter who made them proud. It wasn't jealousy, it was the ache of being half visible in the place that raised me. The only one who saw me fully was the woman who lived just across the hall from my childhood room, my grandmother. She'd press warm cookies into my hands and say the sweetness was for balance, because the world wasn't always fair. She gave softness to a life that often felt like sandpaper. My fiancé met her before he met anyone else in my family. He showed up in a simple sweater and worn-in jeans, a kindness in his eyes my grandmother recognized instantly. They talked for an hour that first day. When he left, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "He's steadier than he looks." She was right. He never tried to impress. He just showed up with a quiet strength I didn't know I needed. My parents didn't see any of that. To them, his simplicity meant insufficiency. They asked vague questions about his job, but only in the way someone checks a box they've already decided is empty. When he didn't elaborate, they wrote their own story, that he lacked ambition, that he wasn't on her level. They never asked what level I wanted to be on. As the wedding season crept closer, the tension thickened. My sister could barely contain her excitement as she listed venues, menus, deposits already paid. My parents nodded with the warm approval I'd chased for years. I watched from the edge of the conversation, pretending the knot in my stomach was just stress. My grandmother noticed. She always did. One afternoon, while trimming the roses in her small backyard, she said, "Sometimes the loudest rooms have the least truth in them." I didn't understand then, but I would. Everything, the favoritism, the imbalance, the cracks in our family, was leading to that Sunday dinner. The night my fiancé stood up and the truth finally stepped into the light. The weeks after that dinner tightened around me like a slow, deliberate squeeze. Every conversation in my family circled back to my sister's wedding, her venue tours, her dress fittings, the deposits she'd confidently placed. My mother repeated the phrase, "a real wedding," so often it began to sound like a judgment carved into stone. I tried to let it wash over me, but each mention felt like another small hand pushing me out of my own life. My father didn't help. He'd glance at my fiancé with the polite smile people use when they're sure they're being generous. "Stability matters," he said once, stirring his coffee like the rhythm steadied him. "You two should think carefully before making commitments you can't sustain." It was framed as advice, but the message was clear. He didn't believe we could stand on our own. He didn't believe I could build anything lasting with a man who didn't parade his accomplishments. My sister absorbed all of this with a bright, oblivious joy. She'd sit on the couch describing floral arrangements, her excitement spilling over while my parents leaned in, hanging on every word. I stayed quiet, hands folded in my lap, wondering how a family could make room for one daughter so effortlessly and leave the other pressed against the walls. The turning point came at the airport. My grandmother had been invited, or at least we believed she had to join them on a short celebratory trip. She dressed carefully that morning, smoothing her blouse with a hopefulness that made my throat tighten. But at the check-in counter, the agent frowned, typed a few times, and said, "There's no reservation under her name." My parents exchanged quick glances, the kind that last only a second, but say everything. My sister stared at her phone. My grandmother's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her bag strap. Maybe there's a mistake," she whispered. But there wasn't. There was never a seat for her. She wasn't part of their plan. Humiliation settles differently when it lands on someone you love. It's heavier, more personal. I felt it hit me like a physical weight. My parents offered excuses, mix-ups, misunderstandings, oversights, but none of them reached her eyes. She simply nodded, thanked the agent, and stepped aside with a dignity sharper than any apology they could offer. I stood next to her silent. I didn't cry then either. I just looked at my fiancé. The airport noise faded a hum behind us. Something in his expression changed, quiet anger, steady purpose. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. My grandmother didn't say a word on the drive home. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window as the city blurred by. Every few minutes, she gave a small nod as if agreeing with a thought only she could hear. When we pulled into her driveway, she thanked us with a soft smile that cracked something in me. She moved slowly, carefully, as though her disappointment weighed more than her bones could carry. Inside the house smelled like lavender and old books. She went straight to the garden door, opened it, and stepped onto the small patio. I watched from the threshold as she knelt among her roses, touching each stem as though apologizing for having left them even just for a morning. The quiet around her felt fragile, like a room where someone had just received bad news but hadn't said it out loud. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "They didn't forget me, Anna. They decided I wasn't necessary." She pulled a wilted leaf from a stem, her hands gentle. People reveal themselves in small choices. That was a choice. I sat beside her knees in the dirt. I didn't try to defend anyone. There was nothing left to defend. Later that evening, while she brewed tea, I opened my laptop. A familiar thought dragged me forward. Someone needed to protect her, even if that someone had never been me before. I searched everything I could find about financial mistreatment of elders. The more I read the definitions, the red flags, the examples, the more a painful clarity settled. It wasn't just the forgotten ticket. It was the way my parents talked about her savings, the way my sister joked about reallocating resources, the way decisions were made around her instead of with her. All the pieces slid quietly into place. When Liam walked in, he paused behind me, reading over my shoulder. "You think they've crossed that line?" he asked softly. "I think they erased it long ago." My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking. It wasn't unsure. He rested a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Then we don't wait for them to do it again." The next day, we met with someone who specialized in protecting older adults. She listened carefully, asked precise questions, and didn't flinch when I described the airport. When she outlined our options, the room seemed to shift. The power I'd felt slipping away for years snapped back into place, quiet but solid. By the time we left her office, the plan was set. And when my family returned from their perfect trip, they wouldn't walk into a warm welcome. They would walk into consequences. They landed on a Thursday afternoon, rolling their luggage through the arrivals hall with that breezy confidence of people who believe the world will always bend toward them. My parents looked relaxed, sun-warmed, chatting about restaurants they liked. My sister walked slightly ahead, scrolling through photos on her phone, probably already planning which ones to post. They didn't expect anyone to be waiting. But Liam and I stood at the end of the railing, and beside us was the attorney, calm, collected, holding a folder thick enough to make my father's smile flicker before he even reached us. My mother slowed first. "Anna, what are you doing here?" My grandmother stepped forward from behind us. She'd insisted on coming not out of anger, but because she wanted to be present, wanted her voice to matter for once. She wore a navy cardigan and held her purse carefully in front of her as though bracing for impact. My sister's eyes darted from me to the attorney. "What's this?" The attorney spoke in a professional, even tone. "I'm here on behalf of your mother. We need to discuss the unauthorized use of her assets and the incident at the airport." My father's face drained. "What incident at the airport?" my grandmother answered quietly. "The one where you left me without a ticket." Silence dropped like an anchor. Travelers pushed past us, wheels rolling, conversations rising and fading, but inside our small circle, the air felt thick, unmoving. My sister scoffed. "It was a mistake, Mom. We explained that." "No," my grandmother said, her voice clearer than I'd heard in years. "You explained nothing. You avoided. You minimized. You told me I must be confused, as though confusion were my default state. She looked directly at her eldest granddaughter. I wasn't confused. My father's jaw clenched. We don't need a lawyer for this. The attorney handed him the envelope. You do now. He opened it, skimming the contents, documentation of withdrawal statements highlighting inconsistencies, a report of the airport incident, and a formal notice to appear for a mediation hearing. With each page, the lines on his forehead deepened. My sister's purse slipped from her shoulder. It hit the floor with a soft thud, ignored by everyone. What is this supposed to mean? She demanded. It means, I said, stepping forward, that she won't be dismissed again. Not by any of you, not ever. My father looked at me, eyes sharp. So this is your doing, no, I said. This is the result of your doing. He bristled. We've supported this family for decades. Don't you dare. Supported Emily, I corrected. Enabled her. Celebrated her. Protected her. And when it came to Grandma, you decided she was optional. Disposable. That's not fair, my mother whispered. It's fair, my grandmother said softly. Fairer than how you've treated me. My sister finally found her voice brittle and cracking. Why are we acting like criminals? We helped you with your bills. We've handled your accounts for years. We were doing you a favor. My grandmother's eyes shone not with tears, but with something like resolve. You handled my accounts because I trusted you. You used that trust to advance your own plans. My father snapped. We never took anything she didn't approve. The attorney interjected, steady and unmoved. Intent will be reviewed during mediation. The pattern is what matters. Control over finances, decision-making without consent, exclusion from travel. These are all indicators of financial exploitation. My sister's composure fractured. This is ridiculous. Tell them, Dad. But Dad just stared at the papers, his bravado collapsing. Not from guilt yet, but from fear of consequences he'd never imagined could reach him. My mother looked at Liam, searching for a soft place to land. You're letting her tear the family apart. Liam didn't flinch. I'm supporting her while she protects someone who deserved protection long before now. My sister barked a laugh. Is that what this is? You pretending to be the hero? You've barely told us what you do for work. Liam exhaled, slow and controlled. You're right, he said. I haven't. My sister rolled her eyes. Of course I'm right. You've been hiding it. No, he corrected. I've been selective with who I trust. He reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply opened a page and held it out for them to see. This is what I do for a living. My sister leaned in and her face fell. The confidence slid off her features like paint rinsed away by water. You, she stammered. You run this. He nodded once. My father blinked rapidly. But you said you were in tech. I am, Liam said. Just not in the way you assumed. My mother put a hand to her chest. But why didn't you say something sooner? Because success doesn't excuse disrespect, he said. And respect doesn't require success. My grandmother smiled faintly at that. My father tried to recover, tried to pull dignity back around himself like a torn coat. Still, involving lawyers. This is extreme. What you did was extreme, I said. Leaving her at the airport was extreme. Using her savings without her full understanding was extreme. My sister folded her arms. Fine. You want to humiliate us? Congratulations. This isn't humiliation, I said quietly. This is accountability. The attorney stepped closer. You'll need to confirm a date for mediation. It's mandatory. My mother's voice wavered. What happens if we don't? Then the court proceeds without your input, the attorney replied. A pause. A shift. My sister whispered, Dad, do something. But he couldn't. For the first time in my life, my father had no leverage, no angles, no prepared speech. He looked at my grandmother, not with affection, but with the dawning realization that the power he'd held over her was gone. My grandmother lifted her purse, settling it on her shoulder. I'm going home now, she said. Anna will take me. She turned, and for a moment I saw her not as fragile, but as formidable, someone who had finally remembered her own worth. When we walked away, my sister's voice rose behind us, cracking under the weight of consequences she'd never expected to face. This is going to ruin everything. Liam glanced back just once. "No," he said, "this is going to reveal everything." And it did. The mediation happened 6 weeks later in a quiet office downtown. No judge's robe, no dramatic gavel, just a long table, a neutral mediator, and the weight of choices finally held up to the light. My grandmother sat beside me, her hands folded neatly, her voice steady as she confirmed each detail: the withdrawals she didn't fully understand, the trip she was promised, the airport humiliation she could still feel in her bones. My father tried to justify, my mother tried to soften, my sister tried to deny, but the facts didn't bend and the mediator didn't flinch. By the end of the session, my grandmother's funds were restored, every dollar accounted for, returned in structured payments overseen by the court. She also updated her will quietly and without ceremony, removing those who had treated her as an obligation instead of family. She didn't do it out of vengeance. She did it to protect her peace. Afterward, she moved into a small house near a garden center. She planted flowers again, roses, hydrangeas, herbs she used to keep by the window. She looked lighter standing in the sunlight, as if her shoulders had finally unclenched after years of shrinking herself to keep the family calm. As for me, something shifted. I enrolled in a community advocacy program, learning how to support older adults who didn't always know how to speak up for themselves. It felt like purpose, like the beginning of something I should have done long ago. And even now, when I pass my grandmother's garden and see her pruning a rose bush, I'm reminded of the same question I'll ask you. Have you ever had to protect someone from their own family? In the end, I learned that real love doesn't demand silence, and family isn't defined by who shares your last name, but by who shows up when it matters. My grandmother regained her voice. I found mine standing beside her. And the truth we brought into the open didn't destroy our lives. It rebuilt